Today's episode is all about something that sits right at the heart of your impact in HR, but it often doesn't get the attention it deserves, and it's employee communication. Because you can design the best strategy, introduce brilliant benefits, or roll out important change, but if people don't understand it, engage with it, or take action on it, it simply won't land in the way that you want it to. And I know from the work that I do as a career and leadership coach supporting HR and people professionals that this is something many people find frustrating. You put a lot of effort into something important and then it feels like no one is really listening. So in today's episode of HR Coffee Time, we're going to change that. I'm your host, Faye Wallace, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Nik Nawaaz, who is Head of Employee Communications at Barnett Waddingham, which is now part of Howden. Nik has a wealth of experience in employee communications with more than 20 years of experience in agency and client-side roles. He describes his approach as being digital first and entirely solutions driven, always making sure that messaging doesn't just reach the workforce, but actually resonates with them. And in this conversation, he shares some brilliant practical advice that you can start using straight away. We talk about what employee communication really is and why it matters so much for HR, the common mistakes that stop messages from landing, simple shifts that can instantly improve engagement, and how to get people to actually take action, whether that's using benefits, completing surveys, or preparing for performance reviews. And also, we look at how to communicate effectively during times of change and uncertainty, something that can be so challenging. I'm incredibly grateful to Nik for sharing his ideas with us. I hope you're going to enjoy learning from him as much as I did. Let's go ahead and meet him now. Welcome to the show, Nik. It is so fantastic to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Faye. I've really been looking forward to this. I've watched a number of your other recordings. So really looking forward to having this conversation.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. And I'm really looking forward to everyone having the opportunity to learn from you. I've said to you so many times, gosh, we could be doing a whole mini series because you have so much knowledge about employee comms, but we'll just stick with the one episode for now, and maybe I'll be lucky and get you back on the show again in the future.
Absolutely. Well, unless anyone is interested in listening to 2.5 hours, which is, like a Lord of the Rings. We should call it the Lord of Comms series.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, the Lord of the Rings episode. Okay. Right. Okay. I'll try and not make it the Lord of the Rings or Lord of the Comms episode and try and keep us to time. Always a challenge. I better start us off by asking you a question that I always think is helpful to start with, which is to ask you for a definition. So employee comms, lots of people will be familiar with it, but some people may not be. Can you please describe to us exactly what is it?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, it means slightly different things. For some people, it's about, really articulating the business vision, for example. But for me personally, I think employee communication is the connective tissue of an organization. So for, the people that are normally watching, for your followers, HR and rewards teams can design, say, the best, restructures or the best benefits package for the workforce. But without effective communications, and I'm not talking about effective being, how many people have downloaded something, but actually talking and listening, those things just become noise in a busy inbox. So for me, it is about being that connective tissue. And I think the other thing as well, in terms of why I think it's maybe really important, for HR professionals, is that, I've sat in many HR teams in my role as employee comms. And personally, I've always enjoyed sitting within HR teams because so often when I talk to clients, HR becomes this almost like a faceless department. And I don't think it should be, because HR teams are the one that always have the pulse of the business. So for me, in terms of why it's important, I think it's about being visible. So, visibility isn't about being on stage, for example. It's about being accessible. So, sometimes just walking the floor, saying hello to people by name is way more effective than any monthly newsletter could ever be. So, that's one thing that I would describe what is employee comms and why it's important.
I should point out at this point that Nik is doing such a better job of talking about what we had agreed we'd talk about today. I'd said to Nik, okay, I'm going to start off, and the first question is going to be, can you share a definition of employee communications? And can you tell us why you think it's so important for HR? And I completely forgot to say there why it's so important for HR professionals. So thank you for rescuing me there and telling everyone who's listening
right.
why you think it's so important. And I completely agree with you. Otherwise, I guess we wouldn't be doing this episode, would we? But what worries me is hearing you say things like HR can seem a bit faceless. Is that the expression that you just used? Yeah. And so it
I
makes me
did, yeah.
it makes me wonder, what do you think the mistakes are that HR professionals tend to make when it comes to employee communications?
Yeah, so I think one of the mistakes that I tend to see is that we, HR people we often write communications from our own perspective, right? We're proud of a new system, or we need to do this because it's, we need to tick that box. But, an employee is really busy, they're stressed, they have an inbox full of other things going on. And for me, they're always subconsciously asking, well, so what? Why does it matter? Why does this matter to me? The stuff that you've just sent to me, how does it impact me and my job? Because I've got a million other things to do, and I've just received this from you. So, but if your message doesn't really answer that in the first, say, 10 seconds, they'll delete it because they'll see it as irrelevant to them. You're just basically broadcasting something. So for me, it's about, really in terms of how you make things better, it's about shifting from talking about, say, features. Say, for example, if you're launching a new HRIS, don't talk about the features, like the portal has a new look and feel or a new user interface, but talking about its benefits. Things like you can now check your remaining holiday days from your phone in under 30 seconds. And already you're giving them a reason to go to the thing that you want them to do, to action something, but also to actually read your message, because you're saying, I'm making your life easier. And that's what I think we need to really get into the habit of.
Oh, it's such good advice, because as human beings, we are all inherently more interested in ourselves than anyone else, aren't we? Even if we'd like to think that's not the case. So that makes a lot of sense to be approaching it in that way. And what I love about so much of your advice and what you've just shared there is that that's quick and easy to implement. That doesn't take a huge amount of time to think about. It doesn't cost any money to start thinking, so what, when you sit down to start writing an email. And although that is quite a quick win, you've shared with us already, they're really quick wins. I know that you have a whole host of quick wins up your sleeve, because when we've spoken before, I've heard lots of them. So would you be happy to just share a few more of what some of those fabulous quick wins are for us all?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, as a tip, I would say maybe you need to be talking to us and my team. So that would be one. That's a shameless plug there about what me and my team can do. But no, seriously, I think my first tip is, this is something I've always said, and I say this to my team as well, because sometimes we get used to doing something and we just get into a habit. My first tip is, take your last email that you've drafted, right, and look at the first sentence. And if it starts with, HR is pleased to announce, or please be advised, that's very much corporate speak. If it starts with anything like that, delete it and start instead with, to help you, or, we've heard that you need XYZ. If you can make that one shift, so moving the why you are communicating to the very top, I think you'll immediately see higher engagement and potentially more respect from the business, because what you're doing is you're putting the employee's needs first. So I think that's my first tip. And it goes back to that whole "so what" thing that I've just mentioned. Always asking, well, so what? What's in it for me? My second tip, I think that. And I think it's just the way that as HR people, I think sometimes we're wired this way. We tend to hide behind corporate speak, right? Because it feels safe. We use words like, and I still hear it, to be honest, even with my own team. It's not like I'm completely different or my team's completely different, but we use words like alignment, human capital, synergy. But realistically, nobody uses those words at a dinner table. And when you use that kind of language, you just, again, it's going back to that sounding like a faceless, robotic department and not a human being. So for me, the best comms is about, using plain English, being conversational and being quite direct. So look at it this way. If you wouldn't say it that way to a colleague over a coffee, then don't put it in an email to a whole company.
Again, it's such great advice, and it's something I really try actually in my emails. And I have a weekly newsletter that goes out that I feel I had to learn how to do that when I first stepped out of my HR career to become a coach. And I started learning about things like having newsletters so people can get to know you and your services and stay in touch. My default was really to write in quite a formal way. And one thing that helped me to stop doing that, hopefully I don't sound really formal and corporate speak in my emails anymore, is actually reading things aloud. And then you can see,
Yes.
or I've found if I write an email and then I start reading it out loud, I'll think, oh, hang on a minute, that sounds a bit strange. That doesn't sound how I would say it in real life.
Yeah. And I think, the other trick that I do, so I do this all the time. And again, this is another free thing that exists. So whenever I'm writing a film script, for example, for a client, whenever we're doing a film with a CEO or the head of HR, for example, so I'll sit here and I'll write a script, and in Word, you can actually play it back to yourself. I don't know whether you knew about
No,
that.
I don't think I did know
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so it's really, really good because you can choose whether you want it to sound American, whether you want it to be UK English, whatever. I always go for UK English, obviously, but you can play it back to yourself, and you can, for a script, especially, it tells you when, it's all a bit monotonous, or maybe you need to go up here and you need to add a comma to give you that pause, etc., etc. So that's a really neat thing to have. It's in Word, so you should have it as a kind of normal plugin.
Oh, I'm going to have to go away and give that a try afterwards. The next question I have for you, when I wrote it down, I'm sure you would tell me how to improve this. It is so long that I can't remember it. So I'm actually going to look at my laptop and I'm going to read the question out to you from this Word document I've got in front of me.
Yeah.
I suppose I could actually play the feature and have Word read it to you, but that might be a bit odd at this point. So the question is, there are two types of communication I've been thinking about for this interview that I know HR professionals will often find challenging. The first is getting people to take action on things like utilising their employee benefits, completing an engagement survey, or carrying out an annual performance review. So I guess they're things that people think are a bit boring and they just don't feel inclined to do them. What are your tips for anyone listening right now who would like to know how to increase the chances that people will take action on things like this?
Yeah, I think benefits communication is something that is just really at the top of the list at the moment. Recently, our company Barnett Waddingham was acquired by Howden, as you know, and Howden is known for brokering benefits for businesses, etc., globally. So we're working with them at the moment to really help their clients with benefits communications. For me, the benefits guide or the handbook approach can't be the only solution, because realistically, not everybody reads a 40-page PDF on their first day, right? I know I've never done it. And then eventually, you probably read like the first 10 pages and you think, okay, I'll park that and I'll come back to it later. And then you never pick it up again. And for the last 10 years or so, I think lots of companies have been talking about, you would have heard about life events, and what I mean by that is when you group your benefits in, you would have heard a lot of companies talk about into moments that matter. So those moments are things like buying a house, starting a family, or managing stress. Now, some of them do it really well, others not so much. What I'm trying to do with Howden at the moment, and Howden is really good at this, is to do things a little bit differently. We've looked at some of the challenges that the HR community and the rewards team face when it comes to benefits communication. There are things like, these teams are juggling a dozen priorities. They have no dedicated budget a lot of the time. And they're trying to cut through the daily noise of technical jargon, right? Now, our approach is a couple of things. So we kind of tackle it with the what, the where, and the why, right? If I start with the why, right, and it will all make sense why I'm starting with the why a little bit later on, but the why is about the outcome that you want to get from them interacting with the benefit, right? So you want people to see how your investment, your organization is making actually protect their families. So once we know what that is, we then look at the where. Well, where are they? You know, your people in an organization, they're not a monolith. They are everywhere. You know, they're in the office, they're in the field, they're working from home. You know, so how do you make sure that people have the same access to the same information? You know, from someone who's sitting at a desk who can easily go onto a portal versus someone who's on the field and doesn't have that same access. And then we look at the what. You know, what do we give them to make sure that it is the right tool for where they are? So we kind of ditch the one size fits all approach, you know, and we kind of create stuff that's specific to the culture of an organization, like whether it's, you know, high energy videos, simple infographics. So, you know, the where, what, why is the way that we approach it. And we wrap this around our philosophy of education, inspiration, and action. So everything that we create starts with education first. Because one of the things that, you know, we are aware of when it comes to benefits communication is a lot of people don't really understand the benefits. And if they don't understand the benefits, they don't have it, if that makes sense. So we look at removing jargon. We try to bring things to life in terms of why you need a benefit rather than just saying this is the benefit. But the other thing that we do, and this is the third thing, everything that we do when it comes to employee comms as well as benefit communication is looking at it through a multi-generational lens. You know, what I mean by that is, you know, every business has different generations, and I'm talking about your Gen Xers, your Gen Ys, your millennials, your boomers. They all exist, and soon we're going to have the generation Alpha coming in as well. All those people want different things at different times of their lives. So, you know, a 45, 50, 60 person is probably more interested in, well, what healthcare do I have? What is my pension pot's going to look like? Realistically, a 21-year-old coming into the business are probably thinking about, oh my God, where am I going on my next holiday? Right? So the benefits that are appropriate for a 21-year-old coming into the business is very different. So the toolkits that we have use messages and tones that speak their specific language.
So it's very much about not just applying a blanket approach, but thinking, okay, we
No.
need to actually adapt our messaging for the different groups and the different types of people that we have within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the only way you're going to get engagement, because if you think about it, when you look at the different generations, when you say you've got your baby boomers versus your generation X, the kind of content they engage with are vastly different. You know, your generation X's are looking at short form content, videos, Instagram type stuff, social media. Your 50, 60-year-olds are going to react more positively towards a benefit or the communication through either face-to-face, long-form content, which is completely the opposite of what your 21-year-old is expecting, because they're a different generation. The way that they deal with content is very, very different. So sending one email to everyone, you will not get the level of engagement that you're thinking.
As you're talking about that, I can absolutely see how that would just be invaluable when communicating about benefits and really hoping that people will take advantage of them, because that's the thing, isn't it? That you can lay on all these fabulous benefits, but people just don't engage with them. But also, listening to what you were just saying, I hadn't really thought about it like this before. If we want people to have their performance appraisal conversation and prepare for it, or we want people to take action on an employee engagement survey, I hadn't really thought about the fact that actually the messaging might need to be different for different groups of people. Yes, in my mind, I'd have thought, oh, okay, for performance appraisal conversations, we're going to need to do a different kind of communication for the managers, because of course they're the ones who are formally sitting down as the line manager with a person, to different communication with the person who is the person going in and being managed by that line manager. I'm describing this really badly, but I hadn't thought about the fact that actually it would be beneficial to have even more nuanced and more sophisticated and just slightly different communication for people who might be at different stages of their career or benefiting from those conversations in different ways.
And actually, I think you've hit a really good point there, just regarding line managers. When it comes to communication doesn't have to sit with just one person, right? So if you're thinking, oh well, it's employee communication, so that must sit with internal comms team, or if you don't have an internal comms team, then HR tends to lead on it. But it doesn't have to sit with one person. In my experience, whenever you're rolling out any form of communication, whether it's about a new system, a new policy, etc., line managers are they need to be your biggest supporters, right? Because they're the ones who have the connection with the team, right? They're that layer between HR and the broader workforce. And if you can get them on board, if you can get them to really listen to you and take on the challenge that you're facing, it makes communicating so much easier, because you've then got the people that they would listen to talking about the same thing. So a lot of the stuff that we do in our team is, whenever we're launching a new platform or we're talking about a new CEO video even that's going out, we always say to the client, look, do your other leaders need some talking points? Don't just assume they know it. Do your line managers need to have some, Q&As, like a little toolkit? And a toolkit doesn't have to be a 25-page thing. It can just be 3 pages. These are the key points that you as manager need to be aware of in case your team asks you a question, because no managers ever want to be asked a question and they say, oh, I don't know, because then the employee just think, oh, I should have just gone straight to X and asked because my manager doesn't know. So what you want to do is for your line managers, your people managers, to feel supported, because actually, if you're elevating them, your job becomes easier when it comes to comms.
Such an important point. Yeah. It's amazing actually how managers just hold the key to so much. Those poor managers, they've got to do an awful lot, haven't they? But I guess this is a way of really helping them as well, by giving them the tools to be able to do their job really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I've got a tip here about with managers. There is this thing that I've used for many, many years at the back of my mind. It's not like an official thing that I have on my agendas. So whenever I must have come across it from somewhere, but I've kind of adopted it in my head. I call it the first 5. So in any meeting with a non-HR department, just spend the first 5 minutes just listening to what's on those people's plates. So don't just jump in with your HR agenda, because I think that when you show you're interested in their operational struggles, I think they'll then be far more likely to listen when you need their help later on. So that's kind of something that I always do whenever I go into a kind of non-HR, when I've been client side. At the back of my head, 5 minutes, that's all I need. What's going on with you? What's challenging this week? Is there anything that we can help with, or have you got it sorted? And let them speak and just listen.
It's amazing just how powerful doing that listening piece can be. I think it really helps build that trust with people, that sense of connection. People really like to be listened to, don't they? It affects how we feel. And that actually makes me think it leads perfectly onto my next question that I wanted to ask you, Nick, which is any advice that you have for HR professionals who are having to think about communications during periods of fear and uncertainty and times of change. So, for example, like if they're having to go through a restructure, that's times when people get so nervous and worried at work, and it can feel hard to know the best way of communicating.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment there's been so many changes that's happening within the industry as a whole, that people are starting to kind of go through this whole change fatigue stuff. But I think one thing that I always start with is, in the absence of information, people will always create a horror story just to fill the gap, right? So silence is always kind of perceived as this threat. So even if you don't have all the answers about the merger or the new restructure. What you should do is communicate maybe what's going on. Tell them, look, and be completely honest, because we've changed. So many things are uncertain, and there's no way you'll have all the answers all the time. So tell them, be honest, say, look, we don't know what the new structure is yet, but we will update you on the 20th of May, right? So by communicating kind of a timeline, it gives people a sense of certainty that, you've got this, you don't have it now, but you're telling me that I'm going to come back to you in the next couple of weeks. Another example, let's say you're launching a new HRIS, right? And what we need to do is stop talking about the project. And I think sometimes, going back to what we were saying earlier on about corporate speak, we need to move away from referring to project and start talking about the progress. So, and use storytelling. Often you'll see an email with a subject line, phase 2 of our digital transformation. But instead, share a quick story or a quote from a team lead, for example, who have saved 5 hours a week using the new system. That's way better than saying, phase 2 of our system. Real world proof from a peer is 10 times more persuasive than, I don't know, a PowerPoint slide from a project manager. So I think about it that way. I think when it comes to change, especially, I think that use your senior leaders, really bring in your senior, get them to talk about it, because you can't do it on your own. You need that top level support. You need that influence to really have that impact. Bring them in. One thing I always say, that I've been in a couple of conferences where when I talk about comms, I don't know if you know about an African proverb I always quote, which is, it takes a village. The whole sentence is, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, internal comms or employee comms is the same. It takes everyone to be effective in employee comms for employee comms to land. So it's not just, it doesn't sit with you, one person, it doesn't just sit with marketing or internal comms team. It's everyone. If everyone speaks the same language, if you're communicating about a change and everyone is saying the same thing, that becomes the accepted norm. And that's what it should be.
Well, I hope that anyone listening who is having difficulty getting buy-in from other people in the organisation to back them, and they do feel like they're having to handle all of these comms by themselves, that they can play this part of the episode, Nick, to convince leadership or whoever it might be who they can't get on board that this is a good idea and that it's going to make that massive difference. But it's been so wonderful talking to you. I feel really sad that we're nearly at the end of our time together today. I honestly could just talk to you about this all day long, and I'm so grateful that you've shared so much of your brilliant knowledge with us all. Before I say goodbye and do a final thank you, can I ask you the question I try to ask everyone who comes on the show, which is, do you have a book recommendation or a resource recommendation you would like to share with us all right now?
Yeah, of course. I've been thinking about this, and one automatically goes to thinking about, oh gosh, what books would be a really, really good one. But actually, I thought to myself, what is something that people can use? Because I've been trying to think about tips that I could give throughout this chat with you, Faye. And I think that I would recommend a TED Talk that I watched that came out probably back in 2010. So it's a bit of an old one, but I think it's a really good one for HR people. It's a TED Talk by Simon Sinek. I don't know if anyone knows of him. And he did a talk called How Great Leaders Inspire Action, right? And I think for a lot of my HR friends, who have been in the industry for years, it tends to be kind of a gold standard for anyone in that kind of environment who wants to really build influence. And he talks about, there's a whole thing about, I think about 1 minute and a half in or something. He talks about the golden circle and why you must start with the why, which is why at the beginning, when I talked about the where, what, and why, I wanted to talk about the why first. In HR, we often start with what the policy is or what the new benefit is. But what Simon does, or Mr. Sinek, or however we want to call him, but what he reminds us is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Right? So why are you offering this benefit? you're never going to say, oh, it's because we're saving money. No, it's because you've chosen this benefit because it has a positive impact on your life as an employee or a colleague. So if you want to close what I call that value gap, because if people don't put any value to to what you're saying, between what you provide and what the employees perceive, then you have to lead with a human purpose behind it. So have a look at that, how great leaders inspire action.
Oh, it's such a great TED Talk. And I'd forgotten that was the title of it, actually. I really, really enjoy hearing a lot of what Simon Sinek has to say. And actually, I play a clip of him talking in my Inspiring HR Leadership program. So you're not the only fan of his stuff. I think he's
Oh,
great as
brilliant.
well.
Good.
And I'll make sure I put a link to that TED Talk in the show notes for anyone who's listening and would like to look it up straight away. And I'll also pop a link to it in the YouTube description for anyone who's watching this on YouTube. So before I say a final goodbye, for anyone listening or watching right now, Nik, who is thinking, oh, I wonder how I could work with Nik or how I can learn more about the work that he does, what would be the best way of them getting in touch with you or finding out more about your work?
Sure. I think probably the easiest way is maybe my LinkedIn profile, which I'm sure you'll probably put in the notes at the bottom. So I don't mind having that on there. And we'll also put a link to our kind of engagement and communications section on the company website. That might help just to give an idea of how we approach employee comms. That might help. But I think maybe for now, LinkedIn would be the simplest way to do it. So, if anyone wants to have a chat, please just add me, connect, and send me a message. Happy to chat anytime.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure I put links to both of those things in the show notes and YouTube description. And all that leaves me to say is a huge thank you for your time today. It has been brilliant chatting to you.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for having me. And it's been really, really good. Sorry, we're probably going to be over, but I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed learning from Nik as much as I did. There were so many useful takeaways in there. But for me, one of the biggest is probably that if your communication doesn't answer the question, so what? For the person receiving it, it's very easy for it to be ignored. And that small shift from focusing on what you want to say to what actually matters to the other person can make such a big difference. If you'd like to listen to another episode of HR Coffee Time next that goes well with today's one, I'd recommend hopping all the way back to episode 32, which is called How to Write Work Emails That Get Results with Kim Arnold. A lot of the advice that Kim shares complements what Nik spoke to us about today. And Nik and I would love to hear if you're going to be putting any of his advice into action. Please do get in touch to let us know. You can always leave us a comment underneath the YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube, or send a message on LinkedIn. I'll make sure that I put links to both of our profiles in the show notes and the YouTube description for you. As always, thank you so much for listening or watching today, and I'm looking forward to being back again in 2 weeks' time with the next episode for you.